The morning began like most mornings in Rome. The sun rose pale and thin, like a dull coin pressed into the sky. Smoke from cook fires hung low, donkeys brayed. A seller shouted the price of figs, a soldier's sandal scraped the stone. Life in the city moved as it always did, busy, loud, and sure of itself. Inside a wealthy house near the Forum, a slave named Tiro lifted a jar of water and felt the rope handles bite his palms. He was young, maybe 20, with a quick step and careful eyes. He had learned to move quietly. He had learned to notice small things, the tilt of a master's head, the twitch of a steward's mouth, the way trouble entered a room before it spoke. In a house like this, silence was safety. Speed was safety. Obedience was safety. Tiro had been born on a farm in Campania. Raiders once took him in a night of fire, and he remembered the smell of thatch and fear. He remembered iron around his neck for the first time. He remembered a market, a platform, a hand forcing his jaw open to check his teeth. He was sold, then sold again, until he was bought by a senator's household and trained to be useful, carrying water, cleaning lamps, running errands, knowing when to be seen and when to vanish. He had learned the names of rooms, the rules of doorways, the weight of a glance. He had also learned the word that held his life: servus, slave. The house had a strict steward. His name was Felix, though there was little luck in him. He kept a wax tablet by his belt and a rod by his hand. He measured loaves, he counted cups, he noticed dust that others missed. When he spoke to Tiro, the words came clipped and hard. Do not look up when the master speaks. Do not speak unless asked. Do not waste oil. Do not scratch the bronze lamps. Do not break the law. The law. In Rome, the law was a thing with teeth. It named who could speak and who could not. It named who could be whipped, nailed, and left to die, and who could not. Tiro knew this as well as he knew the taste of stale bread. Slaves were property. They could be punished in ways no free citizen could. For slaves, death could come high on a wooden cross, in the open air, with crows for company. Everyone knew this. People pretended not to see the crosses until they had to. That morning, a jewel went missing. It was a small sapphire set in a ring, the kind of blue that catches light and holds it. The senator's wife, Livia, reached for it to show a friend and found an empty box instead. The room tightened around her. A gold clasp clicked shut. A curtain stopped moving. Felix's head turned slow as a hinge. He began to ask questions. Who had cleaned the room? Who had changed the wax tablets? Who had carried in the tray? Names were spoken, then spoken again. Tiro felt his stomach sink. Not because he was guilty, but because he was near. In a house of many hands, the hand nearest the loss was the hand the law liked to catch. Felix searched the slaves' quarters. He shook out mats, he ran his fingers along beams, he tipped baskets. He found nothing. He called the household staff into the atrium, where the light from the open roof fell like a square of daylight on the floor. The tiny pool beneath it rippled as drops fell. The senator stood with a face like carved stone. Livia's lips were thin and white. A few guests watched from the side, half hidden, hungry for drama the way crows are hungry for meat. Felix pointed at Tiro. You carried the water this morning. You passed the door.
I passed the door,
Tiro said. He kept his voice low and even. I did not enter. Felix's rod touched Tiro's shoulder, and the room seemed to lean in. Then why, Felix said, did the doorkeeper see your shadow under the curtain? Tiro thought of the hallway, the bright square of light at the end, the curtain moving in a draught. A shadow is a poor witness, he swallowed. I do not know. Liar, someone breathed. The senator raised his hand and the room fell quiet. Felix, he said, the ring is gone. The guests are waiting. The house must be kept in order. He looked at Tiro the way a hawk looks at a small thing in the grass. Make him tell it. The law allowed the use of the whip to force speech from slaves. They called it verberatio when they did it formally. A slave's back was seen as a page that could be written on with iron and leather until the truth bled out. Whether that truth matched the world or only matched the pain, few cared. The law said a slave's word under no pressure was worth very little. The law said pain made words trustworthy. Tiro had watched this before. He had held a basin while another man cried into it. He had never been the one tied to the post. Now Felix's fingers closed around his arm. They took him to the back court, where the air smelled of oil, old rope and cracked clay. There was a wooden post stained dark at the height of a man's chest. Two helpers stood near it. One held a coil of leather thongs with bits of metal worked in. Sharp at the ends like little tongues that tasted for blood, they called it a flagrum. The metal bits were made to bite, the leather was made to last. Tiro's hands were bound above his head, his toes touched the ground, his heels did not. The world narrowed to the grain of the wood against his cheek and the creak of rope. The first lash landed like fire. He felt it before he heard it, the bright, quick pain, the body's fast shock, the breath that would not come. The second lash came before he found the first. He gripped the post with his chest and tried not to cry out, because crying out made the men smile. Felix stood near enough to speak, far enough to keep his tunic clean. "The ring," he said. "Say where it is, and this stops." "I do not know," Tiro said. The whip answered for him. It found his shoulders, then his ribs. It found the soft place where the back meets the arm. It found the thin skin that tears. It left little hooks of pain that pulled every time he breathed. Somewhere a dove cooed, as if none of this mattered. A servant dropped a pot and swore. The world went on, even when a man's back was turned into a map of lines. After a time, Tiro sagged like a rope left in the rain. Felix stepped closer. "Look at me," he said. Tiro lifted his head. He saw Felix's eyes, small and bright, and behind him the senator's wife, cool and pale. He thought of the ring, the flash of blue, the way light can be held and lost. He thought of another slave, older, with quiet hands, who polished Livia's jewelry. He thought of a passing remark about debt and a brother. He thought, but thinking under a whip is like trying to count raindrops in a storm. The leather answered for thought again. After a while he could no longer keep his voice steady. Sound broke out of him, not words, just sound. When he woke he was on the floor, sticky with blood and sweat. Someone had thrown water on him. The senator stood above him. Felix held a little wooden board, the titulus, the sign that named the crime. A wax stylus cut neat letters into it. "Enough," the senator said. "We waste the day. Rome must see what happens when order is broken. The ring is gone. The house has been shamed in front of guests. Make an example." The word example fell like a stone into Tiro's stomach. He knew what it meant. Not a beating, not the mines. The worst punishment a slave could face in Rome was crucifixion. It was public. It was slow. It was meant to be seen. It was meant to speak to the crowd in a voice louder than any man could shout. This is what happens to the low when they forget they are low. Citizens could be beheaded. Sometimes they were spared the cross by the kindness of birth. Slaves had no such shield. Felix read the crime out loud as he wrote it, so the helpers would hear, and so Tiro would hear. Thief, domum violavit, he violated the house. He paused, then added, exemplum fiat, let him be made an example. 2 soldiers from the nearest post were called to make it lawful. They looked bored. This was work like any other. They had nails in a pouch and ropes coiled at their belts. One had a small wooden wedge called a sidile, used sometimes on the cross as a kind of seat, not for mercy, but to keep a man alive longer. They knew their craft. Tiro's hands were untied from the post, only so they could be tied again, this time around a heavy crossbeam made of rough wood. It was called the patibulum. Many condemned were made to carry it to the place of execution. The upright stake, the stipes, often stood outside the city gate, used again and again. Changing the crossbeam saved time and timber. A clear path was chosen so that as many people as possible could see. They put the crossbeam across Tiro's shoulders and tied his wrists to it, so he could not let it fall. The wood dug into the whipped flesh of his back. The pain was not sharp now. It was the deep, steady pain of a flame that would not go out. He took a step. The beam moved. He took another step. The rope bit deeper. He felt like a pack animal. He felt like a tool with legs. He breathed, and with each breath he wondered how many more he would be allowed to take. They led him through the streets. People turned to look. Some laughed, some frowned. A child asked his mother, "What did he do?" The mother said, "He stole," and pulled the child closer, as if theft were a sickness that could jump from skin to skin. A baker wiped flour on his apron and leaned in his doorway to watch. A woman with a basket of greens paused, then moved on. Life flowed around the procession the way water moves around a rock. The soldiers walked with a slow, heavy rhythm, used to the weight of public death. One soldier carried the titulus ahead of Tiro, so all would know the name of the crime before they saw the body that would pay for it. A spit of meat hissed over a brazier. A dog barked. Someone threw a pebble. It struck the wood, not Tiro, but he flinched anyway. He kept his eyes on his feet and counted the stones until the numbers were the only place in the world that felt like his. They passed the Forum, where statues of men who had lived and died for Rome stared with blank eyes. They passed a money changer flicking coins. They passed a shrine where someone had laid a small garland for a god who would never notice. At the city gate the air changed. There was more wind, there were more birds. Beyond the walls, the road ran straight and hard. It was lined not with trees, but sometimes with crosses, old and grey, like dead men standing guard. The place of execution was near the road, so travellers would see. Punishment in Rome was not private. It was a lesson written large. People gathered because people always gathered. Some came to mock, some came to stare, some came to remind themselves that they were safe, for now, because they were not the ones with wood on their shoulders. A few came because they could not help but feel the pull of any human face in pain. They came and held their breath, and then exhaled with guilt. The soldiers untied Tiro's wrists from the beam and threw him on the ground. Gravel pressed into his knees. The sky was high and merciless. A hammer lay on the earth, clean for the moment. Near the upright stake there was a small jar. Inside was sour wine mixed with water. Posca. Soldiers drank it on long days. Sometimes they offered it to the condemned, not as kindness, but to keep a throat wet enough to swallow one's own suffering out loud. A guard lifted the jar and took a long drink. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He set the jar down. They stretched Tiro across the beam. A soldier took his arm and probed for the right place. They did not put nails through the palm. The flesh there would tear. They used the wrist, the place where the bones meet strong. The soldier felt for the gap, set the iron, and looked at his mate. The other soldier steadied the wood. In that heartbeat of stillness, all the roads of Tiro's life crossed in his chest. He thought of a fig tree near his old home, the way the fruit split open in summer. He thought of running as a child through tall grass and the way grass seeds stick to skin. He thought of the market, the man's hand prying his mouth to see his teeth, the weight of a board around his neck that said "for sale." He thought of a girl in the kitchen who laughed once and then never again, because laughter drew eyes, and eyes drew trouble. He thought of the ring, a flash of blue, and of how a little thing could tilt a whole life. He thought, too, of how Rome loved order more than truth. If a house lost a jewel, someone's blood must balance the scales. The house must be clean, the guests must be calm, the street must learn its lesson. Whether the lesson matched the facts was less important than the sight of it being taught. A crow flew low and cawed, as if to answer the nail before it spoke. A centurion arrived then, slow and sure, with a face deep lined from sun and war. He read the titulus. He looked at Tiro, then at the soldiers, then at Felix, who had come to watch the end of his work. The centurion nodded once. "Proceed," he said, in a tone that had sent men into battle and brought them back. Tiro felt a shadow pass over him as the soldier raised the hammer, and then, from the edge of the crowd, a shout cut through the hot air, sharp, urgent, and strange. "Stop the ring!" Heads turned. The hammer paused. The nail gleamed. A woman pushed forward, breathless, clutching her sleeve. Something small and blue flashed in her fist. The soldier's arm trembled. The centurion narrowed his eyes. Tiro lifted his head from the dust and saw, for the first time that day, a shape of hope the size of a sapphire. The hammer hung in the air like a hawk deciding whether to dive. The shout froze the day. "Stop the ring!" The soldier's hammer hovered in the air. A woman in a plain wool dress pushed through the crowd, her breath rough in her throat. She was not rich. She held her sleeve with one hand to keep from falling. In her other hand, something small flashed blue whenever the sun struck it. The centurion raised a flat palm. The soldiers lowered the hammer and drew back a step. Dust swam in the light. The crowd pressed closer in a circle that breathed as one animal. The woman reached the centurion and bent low. "Master," she said, voice shaking, "I sell greens by the lower market. This fell into my basket when two men argued near my stall. One ran, the other swore by every god he knew and chased him. The runner dropped this." She opened her hand. A sapphire glowed like a piece of afternoon sky. Felix stepped forward fast. "Let me see." He did not ask. He took. He turned the ring in his fingers with a care he had not shown to human skin. The gold held the stone like a small sun holds its blue. On the inside, close to the curve, tiny letters had been scratched with a fine tool. LS. Livia's initials in Latin. Felix knew the mark. Livia insisted on it for her best pieces. His face did not change much, but a narrow line near his mouth deepened. Livia herself, who had kept a careful distance from the dust and the heat, stepped near enough to look. She saw the mark and let out a slow breath, as if a band had been loosened from her chest. Then she remembered that a crowd watched her, that her husband's face was turned toward her, and that the household's honor had been dragged into the open street. Her mouth became a quiet blade again. The centurion held out his hand. Felix put the ring into it. The centurion weighed it, the way soldiers weigh any object that can change a day, like a piece of evidence, like a coin, like a weapon. He turned to Felix. "Your titulus says theft," he said. "If this ring was found in the street while your slave stood tied for the nail, perhaps your truth walks on weak legs." Felix bowed. The house was violated. The ring was missing from a locked box. "This man," he pointed at Tiro, "passed the door. He lied about his shadow. The law must teach." The centurion's eyes were like flint. He had kept order in more than one city. He had seen how fast a crowd turns cruel and how fast it turns coward. He had also seen how a small mistake, left standing, can grow into a riot. "I do not butcher men to cover another man's haste," he said. He looked at Tiro on the ground, wrists ready, back cut and raw, breath coming like little knives. Then he looked up at the woman who had run with the ring. "You," he said, "did you see the face of the man who ran?" She nodded, afraid and brave at the same time. "A slave, sir, older, thin. He carried a small box when he came by earlier. He had oil on his hands. He smelled of filings and metal." She searched for words simple enough. "A workman's smell." Felix did not move. Only his eyes clicked like beads as they counted possibilities. A workman's smell. Oil, filings, a small box. He could have named the slave in 3 guesses. The jewellery boy, his name was Parmenon, though people in the house called him the lapidary, even when he polished brass and soldered broken clasps. He had quiet hands. He kept his head down. He had a brother with debts. Felix had noted it once the way a hunter notes a broken fence near a deer track. The centurion jerked his chin toward the soldiers. "Bring the man who keeps the household's jewels," he said. "If he has run, bring someone who knows where he sleeps. We will go," a soldier said, ready to move. He looked to Felix. Because house knowledge lives in the steward's head, the way street plans live in a city map. Felix held up a palm, smooth, careful. "Save your steps," he said. "I sent a boy to find Parmenon when the ring was first missed. He did not answer his corner. He did not answer the workyard. He was not at the brazier." "He is already gone." "Then let him be fetched from where he hides," the centurion said. "Until then, I do not nail a man under a broken charge." He turned to Tyro. "On your feet." The ropes came loose from Tyro's wrists. Blood stuck to fibre. When the wood lifted off his back, it felt as if the skin went with it. The road tilted and swayed. His legs did not believe they still belonged to him. A soldier gave him a rough arm without softness and dragged him up. "Not free," the centurion said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Held for judgment, the house will present the right man. If they cannot, the prefect will sort it." Rome is not a drunk who swings at shadows. He handed the ring to Livia and kept his eyes on Felix, as if to say, "Do not make me clean your floor." The circle of people loosened. Disappointment moved through it like wind. Some had come to see blood and sound and nails. A few looked relieved. A few looked angry that their story had been taken away. This is the way with crowds. They are never one thing for long. The soldiers tied Tyro's hands again, but in front this time, and pulled the rope like a leash. They walked him, Felix and Livia, back toward the house with the woman who had found the ring walking behind them, as if she could not believe her legs wanted to follow. Inside the gate the light changed again. The hard road became swept stone. The smell of garlic and sweat faded into oil and wax and old wood. The guests who had watched earlier returned to their wine with faces that said they were above all this, and eyes that said they could not stop thinking about it. The senator stood in the atrium under the square of sky. He did not look pleased. He did not look angry. He looked like a man doing sums and not liking the numbers. Livia put the ring into his hand. He turned it over and found the little letters. He nodded once at his wife, then at the centurion, a second time for the crowd's sake, a third time for himself. "To the tablinum," he said. "We will hear." They gathered in the long room where the household accounts were kept, where the master met clients, and where slaves sometimes learned what a morning would cost. The wax tablets lay stacked. The stylus lay neat beside them. The rod lay by the door like a dog that never slept. The centurion stood to one side, a guest of the law. Felix stood near the wax. Livia sat because a woman who manages a great house is a queen in her own square of power. Tyro stood in the middle with a rope round his wrists and blood on his back, drying into a stiff shirt that clung to him like a bad name. Felix spoke first. He spoke with care. The ring went missing from a locked box. The box was in the lady's room. The key was with me. I did not open it that morning. The only hands near the door were the maid with the tray, the boy with the lamp, and Tyro with the jar. Tyro denied he passed the curtain, but the doorkeeper saw his shadow on the floor. I took him to the post, as the law allows, because the guests were in the house. Then the ring was found. A street woman says she saw a slave run and drop it. She says he smelled of metal and oil. We have such a slave. He is not at his bench. Livia's voice was cool water over hot stone. "Fetch Parmenon," she said. "We will," the centurion answered. "But until then, this one," he nodded toward Tyro, "does not die. That is the law inside my fence." The senator's eyes flicked toward Felix. "You were quick." "Quickness keeps a house clean," Felix said. He did not bow too deep. He did not look away too fast. Sometimes it sweeps dirt under the bed, the centurion said. A slave girl slipped into the room with a jar of water and a stack of cloths. She set them near Tyro without lifting her eyes. Livia nodded once. "Wash his back," she said. The girl moved like shadow and did as told. The water stung like fire and grace at once. A runner arrived breathing hard. He had dust on his knees. "Parmenon," he said, not at his corner. But a neighbour boy saw him near the lower market. He had a small box and walked fast. He turned toward the Tanner's Alley. Tanner's Alley was where smells went to be stronger. Hides were scraped there, skins turned into leather. The water that ran away from those shops went black and then brown and then black again. It was a place where a man could vanish if he did not mind what clung to him. The centurion nodded to a soldier. "Take 4, he said. "Find him." The soldier left with a shrug and a grin, shaped like a promise. Soldiers like clear tasks. Silence spread in the room like oil on water. The senator looked at Tiro. "If you are clean," he said, "you will say so." Tiro knew how little his words were worth without marks of iron to back them. He spoke anyway. "I am clean." Livia watched his face. She had spent years reading faces. She knew lies told by men who wanted to hide a lover or a debt. She knew the small shame in a woman's jaw when she brought back a broken cup. She saw no trick in Tyro. She saw pain that had not learned to put on a mask yet. She said nothing, but something small in her loosened again. Felix did not loosen. He stood like a bow that had not been unstrung. A house this large had enemies. They did not always come from outside. Men like Felix were hired to make sure fear did not leak out of the walls like smoke. If Tyro walked away from this, other eyes might grow brave, other hands might grow bold. This could not be allowed. Hours pass slowly when they wait on other feet. The waterskins were changed. The sun moved across the square of sky. The girl washed Tiro's back a second time when the cloth stuck to wounds. He did not thank her. He did not dare to speak. He closed his eyes and saw the hammer hanging in the air, like a hawk that had not decided whether to fall. By late afternoon, boots hammered the floor outside. The soldier came in with Parmenon's arm twisted behind him. Parmenon's hair was grey at the temples. His hands were careful, even when bound, as if they had forgotten how to be clumsy. A smear of black water stained his ankle where a puddle had argued with his step. His eyes looked tired, and under the tiredness was fear shaped like a small animal that has learnt to sleep with one eye open. The centurion spoke plain. "Your lady's ring left its box. A street woman saw you run. Where is your small box?" Parmenon did not lift his eyes to the lady. He kept them low, on the floor, on the nails of his own toes. "I have no box," he said softly. The street woman, who had been kept in a side room with a cup of watered wine and a watchful maid, was brought in. She looked at Parmenon and bobbed her head. "This one," she said. "I know that head. He passed near every third day to buy thread. He smelled like hot metal. Today he ran." Parmenon swallowed. "I walked fast," he said. "A man took something from me." "What?" the centurion said. "A ring," Parmenon whispered. The room moved closer, though no one stepped. He still did not look up. "I owe my brother's creditor. He said he would cut him if silver did not come. I took the ring to the market. A man saw it. He struck it from my hand. He grabbed it. He ran. I ran after him. I am old. He was quick. I lost him in Tanner's Alley. I would have come back to put the ring in its place. I would have said—" He stopped. Words fled. Shame stayed. Felix's voice was dry. He would have said he borrowed the sky. Livia's face did not move, but her fingers tightened on the arm of her chair, the way a hand tightens on a rope when a boat tips. The senator's jaw worked left, then right. "You have served my house," he said to Parmenon. "You have handled gold. We trusted you." His voice was not loud, it did not need to be. "You stole?" Parmenon shook his head once, small, hopeless. I meant to bring it back." "That is not a law," the centurion said. His words were simple. They were a door hard to open from the wrong side. Felix took up the stylus and the wooden tablet. He did not need to ask for orders. The law inside a house is often made by the man who is quickest to put a tool into his hand. He cut neat letters. "Parmenon, fer, crux, exemplum." Parmenon's shoulders sank. He did not beg. He did not ask. He understood the weight of those 4 words the way a man knows the weight of a stone mill when it starts to turn. Tiro felt the room spin. The hammer that had hung above him now swung toward another neck. Relief does not always taste sweet. Sometimes it tastes like iron and old fear. He had not stolen, but he had not saved Parmenon either. He looked at Felix and found no pity there. He looked at Livia and found a tightness like a bandage pulled too far. He looked at the centurion and found a wall. The centurion nodded once to his men. "Prepare the patibulum," he said. "Outside the gate, near the road. The day is not done." They moved quickly. This time, the crowd in the street grew thicker. Word runs faster than feet. "A slave will hang," it said. "A thief will be nailed." No one asked if the thief had a brother. No one asked what fear had pushed the man's hand across a line it had not crossed for 40 years. The crowd asked for a story with a clean end. Tiro was not allowed to go with them, but Felix called him anyway. "You will watch," he said. "You will carry the water jar and stand with the others. You will learn with your eyes. If your hand ever toys with another door, your back will remember today, and your mind will see tomorrow." The slaves of the house walked in a line behind the soldiers. Some had seen crosses before, some had never stood close. The sky looked larger outside the gate. The wind spoke in dry grass. The same jar of sour wine sat near the upright post, the stipes, which had been used by many men and would be used by many more. A carpenter's boy wiped old blood from the beam with a rag that would never be clean again. They tied the patibulum across Parmenon's shoulders. He winced, not from the wood alone, but from the knowledge that the wood was not a tool this time. It was a sentence. They did not flog him as they had flogged Tiro. The morning had already taken those lashes. The law did not demand a man be beaten twice if the first work had written enough lines on his back. But they did not untie Tiro's rope either. He stood near, a witness, linked to the story by pain and chance and class. The titulus went ahead, carried high so eyes could learn the lesson before hearts had time to soften. Parmenon, fer, crux, exemplar. The words marched like small soldiers with no ears. At the place of the cross, they threw Parmenon to the earth and stretched his arm along the beam. A soldier pressed his forearm with a knee and felt for the gap between the wrist bones. He set the square nail. He raised the hammer. The iron rang against iron. The sound was not like in stories. It was duller, wetter, more final. Tiro flinched with each strike. The crowd made the sound crowds make when they try to swallow their own breath and cannot. They nailed the other wrist. Blood threaded down the wood in 2 narrow streams that did not look like the sea people describe when they say crimson. It looked like what it was, life leaving by a road it did not choose. They lifted the beam with ropes and men and fitted it to the upright post. The whole shape jerked and settled. Parmenon's body pulled against the nails. His chest rose, then stopped, then rose again in a new way, a strange way. Crucifixion is not only about nails, it is about breath. A body hung by the arms must push up to breathe out. It must draw up to draw in. The muscles of the chest fight the weight of the body. The legs cramp, the shoulders burn, the wrists scream. The back rubs raw wood with each small lift, and every splinter becomes a tooth. Sometimes they tied the arms with rope instead of nails. Sometimes they used both. Sometimes they fixed a small wooden peg, a sedile, under the man to give him something to sit on. It was not mercy. It was a way to keep him alive longer, so the lesson could last. Today, the soldiers used a short peg. Parmenon's weight settled on it just enough to let him lift and sag, like a bellows that would slowly fail. Hours can be longer than days when a body becomes a task. The sun leaned. Flies came. A dog trotted near, sniffed and was driven off with a kick. A boy tried to get closer and was dragged back by an ear. A woman crossed herself, in the old way for a god older than Rome, and turned her face aside. Livia stood in the shade of her litter. She did not look away. Power is a kiln that hardens eyes. Felix watched the crowd almost as much as he watched the cross. He liked to see men read the words he had carved. He liked to see them flinch. He believed fear was a good fence, and that his job was to keep it mended. The centurion stood, arms folded, counting breaths the way soldiers count anything that can end. Parmenon worked for air. Little sounds came from him, not loud cries, not curses, not prayers anyone could name, just the small noises any animal makes in a trap when it learns what the trap is. Sweat found old cuts on Tiro's back and stung them into memory. He did not know where to put his eyes. On the ground? On the man? On the people who watched? He chose to fix them on the nails because they were simple and honest and did not look away. Near the foot of the cross, a small group of house slaves stood with their jars and bags. One of them, an old cook, said in a voice too low for soldiers to care about, "He was always decent. He saved oil drips and gave them back to the pot. He did not steal bread." Another slave, younger, hard with years that had not been kind, answered without moving his mouth much, "Decent men still drown if the water is deep." A third said nothing. He looked at Tiro's rope, at Tiro's raw back, and then at Felix, and learned a lesson no tablet had spelled out yet. An hour past midday, the centurion gave a small sign. The soldiers stepped forward with long poles. On each pole was a sponge tied to the end. One sponge dipped into the jar of sour wine, posca, the cheap drink that keeps the throat from turning to dust. They lifted it to Parmenon's lip. He turned away first, then turned toward it, then drank, then coughed. The sour wet kept him talking to his own lungs a little longer. The centurion looked up at him. "Parmenon," he said, steady, not cruel, not kind, simply practical. "Did someone put your hand to this? Did someone guide it? Speak, and your end may be quicker." Parmenon lifted himself for a breath, then sagged. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, he looked past the soldier's shoulder into the line of house slaves. He looked at Tiro. The look was long enough for Tiro to feel it enter him, like a small nail made of attention. Then Parmenon turned his head a finger's width. He looked at Felix. Felix did not move. A cloud passed over the sun and moved on. Parmenon's voice reached down through the hot air. It was rough. It was small. It was clear enough to hear if you wanted to hear. "I took a loan," he said. I was the hand. The crowd let out a breath it had been holding as if a play had found its next line. The centurion's face did not change. He waited, anyway, the way a man waits for the second roll of thunder. "And the thought?" he asked. "Whose thought?" Parmenon's mouth opened. He worked for air. He closed his mouth. He lifted, and the wood rasped a line across his back that would never heal. He opened his mouth again, and this time he put a word into the world. It was not Tiro's name. It was a name that lived inside the house like a hidden nail that slags every passing cloth. The name fell into the dust between the soldier's feet. Felix's eyes flickered. Tiro felt something cold run through him that was not air, not fear, not hope. It was a thought trying to be born in a place where thoughts were not safe. The centurion's head tilted half an inch, the way a hawk's head tilts when it sees a mouse it was not sure about a moment before. Felix's lips drew thin and then smoothed, as if he had pressed them under a flat stone. Livia turned, just enough for one gold earring to catch the sun. Parmenon took a breath, like a man climbing out of a water jar. "Forgive me," he said, "not to the men with nails, not to the woman with a ring, not to the crowd." He said it to a place only he could see. The centurion lowered his hand, and the soldier with the hammer, the one whose arm had hung above Tiro that morning, stepped forward with a heavy bar. Sometimes when a man hung too long and the day needed to close, they broke the legs to finish it. It spared the soldiers hours and spared the city a shadow that stretched across evening. It did not spare the man much. The bar rose. Tiro's mouth moved without sound. The bar fell. A sound like a board snapping in a wet room went out and came back again from the stone of the wall. The chest could no longer push up. The breath came in small, high sips, and then in smaller ones, and then in none. Silence arrived like a person who had been walking behind you for a long time without making a sound. The centurion counted to a number he did not say and nodded. A soldier jabbed a spear point into the side to be sure. Blood and water mixed. The lesson was over. The crowd began to go the way crowds always go, speaking of bread and of games and of the next thing. Some faces were pale, some were bright, some were empty. The earth held the shadow of the cross like a stain. Felix turned to the line of house slaves. His voice was clean, not loud. "Carry our things," he said. "Do not look back. Rome is watching." Tiro did not look back. He could feel the shape of the cross behind him, the way a man can feel a cliff at his back even in the dark. They walked toward the gate. The city swallowed them again, with all its orders and smells and rules. That night, in the slave quarters, no one sang, no one threw the little bone dice, no one told the small jokes that usually softened the end of work. People lay on mats and looked at walls. The air was warm. A dog snored outside like a tired man. Somewhere water dripped into a basin, and the small sound kept time with a thought that stalked the room. Tiro could not sleep. Every time he let his eyes close, he heard the iron. He saw the peg. He felt the wood slide under skin that was not his. He tasted the sour wine he had not drunk. He opened his eyes and saw the ceiling. He sat up and saw the door. He stood and saw the thread of light under Felix's room, as narrow as a blade. He thought of the word Parmenon had dropped. He rolled it in his mind the way a tongue rolls a sharp seed. He thought of who that word belonged to and why. He thought of the ring and of the missing hours and of fear dressed as order. A rat skittered in the straw. Somewhere far off a woman laughed once and stopped. The city breathed, the night held, and Tiro, who should have been dead by noon, stood in the dark and asked himself a new question, one larger than his own skin. If Parmenon did not pull this rope alone, who did? And why did a man on a cross choose to say that name at the end? Morning came without mercy. Rome woke as if nothing had snapped in the sun the day before. Wheels bumped on stone. A rooster crowed late, like a soldier who slept past his call. A water seller called his price. Smoke lifted in thin blue lines. Tiro rose slow. Every movement pulled at the cuts across his back. The cloth stuck, then peeled, then stuck again. The slave girl from the day before left a small pot by his mat, honey mixed with crushed herbs. She did not speak. He dipped 2 fingers and spread the paste where he could reach. The sting made his eyes water. The sweet smell pushed back the stink of old straw for a little while. He remembered the name Parmenon had spoken on the cross. It was not shouted, it was not loud, but it had the weight of a stone when he dropped it. He had said, clear enough to hear if you wanted to hear, Felix, not master, not lady, not Tiro, Felix, the steward who kept the rod and the keys and the wax, who watched the house the way a hawk watches a field, the man who moved fast when others froze, the man who had taken Tiro to the post without a breath between order and lash. Felix. Tiro said the name once in his mouth, with no voice, like a prayer the gods would not hear, or a curse too small for daylight. He did not yet know what to do with it. In the kitchen, the first loaves came out of the oven with a crackle. A cook slapped a boy's knuckles when he reached early. The boy grinned anyway. Slaves have to steal small joys where they can. A mouthful of fresh crust, a splash of cool water, a joke that lands. Today the jokes did not rise. People moved as if the floor might break. Felix entered with his wax tablet under his arm. His face was smooth and clean, as if night washed away all dust. He gave orders. He pointed, counted, named, measured. When his eyes passed over Tiro, they did not stop. It was as if Tiro were a pot on a shelf. The senator called for the centurion just after mid-morning. Livia sat beside her husband. She wore no rings. The square of sky above the atrium was bright white. The water in the little pool was still. The centurion arrived in a plain cloak. He did not bow low. He did not need to. He stood as the law stands, straight, not soft, not bent by a rich man's breath. "Your man is dead," he said without extra words. "He died under the charge you set on the titulus." The senator nodded once, as if to say he already knew what the son had done. "My house was wronged," he answered, "and a wrong was paid for." The centurion's eyes shifted to Felix. A dying man spoke a name. Felix inclined his head the way polite men do when they do not like the cup they must drink. "Dying men speak to clouds," he said. "Words on a cross are like a fire in a dry field. They run fast and leave ash." He stole. He wished to drag others with him into the pit that is old as hunger. The centurion did not blink. "Sometimes last words are lies," he said. "Sometimes they are knives that cut through lies." "I will ask." "You have asked," the senator said, voice cool. "My steward keeps order. He is firm. He is quick. He has enemies. Poor men often hate the hand that holds the scales." Livia's gaze did not move. She watched the men the way one watches two dogs to see which will bite first. The centurion turned to Tiro. "You heard yesterday." Tiro swallowed. He could feel Felix's eye on his cheek like heat from a brazier. He kept his voice even. "I heard a name," he said. "I heard Felix. I heard it as plain as my own breath." Felix smiled a little. It was not a kind smile. It was a smile like a blade in a bright room. "This boy," he said, "owes his life to the centurion's caution and the lady's ring. Fear bends men. Gratitude blinds them. A house slave can be taught to repeat what a soldier wants to hear." The centurion's jaw worked once, then stopped. "Answer me this," he said, still to Tiro. "When your back was written on yesterday, did your steward ask you a question or make you an example?" Tiro's eyes went to the post in his mind. He tasted leather. "He asked," Tiro said, until the asking was a whip. Livia raised a hand, the way one calms a room with a breeze. "This quarrel between men is now my house," she said. "Felix, bring the key to my box." Felix did not move. "Bring it," she said again. He went. He returned with a small iron key on a loop of leather. He put it in Livia's palm. It was warm from his hand. She walked to her room. They all followed, even the centurion, which made the maids whisper when his boots crossed the threshold of a lady's space. The box sat on a low table near the mirror of polished metal. It was wood with iron corners, plain, strong. Livia slid the key in and turned. The lock opened with a sound like a small cough. Inside, velvet cradle rings and pins and coins. The blue ring lay where she had set it. Livia lifted it, then set it down again, as if to say, "We will not lose this twice." The centurion bent over the lock. He looked at the key. He looked at the plate. He sniffed. "Bring me a lamp," he said. A boy ran. The centurion held the flame near the keyhole. He did not touch. He watched. "What do you see?" the centurion asked, annoyed, amused, both at once. "I see bees," the centurion said. Felix let out a small breath through his nose, the kind men make when another man talks nonsense. "Bees?" "Wax," the centurion said. "There is wax on the inside lip of the keyhole. A thin smear, almost gone, but it is there." Livia's hand went to her throat. She was not wearing a necklace. "A mould," she whispered. The centurion nodded once. "You take the key in the night, press it into warm wax to carry the shape, then press that shape into softer metal, or you carve it in wood to fit for a single turn. A man who works with filings and oil would know this trick. A steward who keeps keys would know to look." Felix's face did not change. His voice stayed calm. "The box is opened often. Wax from a seal could smear. The boy with the lamp could drip. The house is full of wax." "True," the centurion said. "Also true, you moved very fast to the post when the ring went missing, faster than a careful man moves when a guest sits in his atrium. And when the ring was found, you were slower to ask how it left a locked box than to say who should die in the street." "Are you my judge?" the senator asked, heat rising like wine left too long in the sun. "Or my guest?" "I keep Rome from turning into a knife," the centurion said. "We have enemies," the witness said. "The task walks through your house today." Silence sat between them. Then Livia did something no one expected. She turned to Tiro. "Come," she said. She led him to her dressing table. "Tell me what you see." Tiro looked at the little world on the table. A comb, a pin, a small bowl with ash for darkening brows, a bronze mirror, a strip of soft leather with tiny cuts from rings. He looked at the floor. He looked at the wall. He looked down, where dust keeps secrets when the rich think the room is clean. Near the table leg, almost hidden in a crack, he saw a curl of metal wire, thin, like a hair that could cut. He did not touch it. "There," he said. The centurion knelt. He lifted the curl with his nail. He turned it in the light. "Saw wire," he said, "soft, used for cutting tiny grooves. A jeweler uses such wire. So does a man who picks locks." Livia's eyes flicked to Felix. Felix's face was a quiet wall. "Parmenon worked near jewels," Felix said. "The little wire clings to slaves who clean. A curl by a lady's table is not a god's sign, it is a house's life." The centurion did not argue. He tucked the wire into a small leather pouch on his belt, like a man who keeps his thoughts in order. "I will speak to your doorkeeper again," he said. "Shadows know more than men think." He left. His soldiers followed. Their boot sounded like a verdict going down the hall. One no one had read yet. The senator returned to his accounts. Livia returned to her chair. Felix returned to the kitchens and the yard, where life made by many hands kept moving. Tiro returned to work with a new weight under his ribs. All day whispers ran like mice. "Parmenon," said Felix. "No," he said, Felix, like happy, like a fool's word. "No, I heard a name." "No," he coughed. "They will hang the boy yet. They will blind the jeweler's brother. The centurion is not like others. He looks, he listens. He will be paid to forget." "Who will pay him?" "Who can pay him?" "Hush, hush." Near noon, Tiro carried a tray to the outer room where clients waited for the senator. Men in worn togas sat on benches and fanned themselves with poor dignity. A freedman with thin hair and a fat purse sat a little apart. His ring had a cheap green stone. He wore it like a man wears a badge he bought in the market. He tapped his knee. He did not look at the slaves. He stared at the door as if his eyes could pull it open. When Tiro passed, the freedman's sleeve slipped. Tiro saw a mark on the man's wrist, a small scar shaped like a circle, thin and white, where a hot ring once burned. Debt men sometimes marked those who owed with iron, the way cattlemen mark animals. It was illegal in the open, common in the dark. Later, in the yard, Tiro asked a water boy, "Who's the man with the green stone?" His name is Demas, the boy said, with the pride of someone who knows a thing and can sell it for attention. He lends, he bites, he speaks slow so you think he is kind, then he sharpens his teeth. Who owes him? Tiro asked. The boy's eyes flicked left and right. Parmenon's brother owes. The brother plays dice in a back room near Tanner's Alley. The air seemed to grow heavier without getting hotter. Tiro felt a shape form in the space between facts. It was not yet a picture, only lines that wanted to meet. That evening, the centurion returned with the doorkeeper, a man with ears like handles and a nose that bent left. The doorkeeper stood in the atrium and rubbed his hands and kept looking at Felix the way small dogs look at big dogs before they bark. The centurion said, "Tell it again." The doorkeeper licked his lips. "I saw the shadow," he said. "It crossed the crack under the curtain." "What made it?" the centurion asked. "A man," the doorkeeper said. "Or a boy," he swallowed. "Or a rod," he added quickly. "The steward walks with a rod." "Was it long like a man?" the centurion asked. "Or short like a rod?" The doorkeeper's eyes slid to Felix's hands. Felix's fingers were quiet. They did not drum. They did not clench. They were just there, like snakes that sleep but are not dead. "It was long," the doorkeeper said. "Did you see feet?" "No." "Did you hear the curtain rings move?" "No." "Then perhaps it was the curtain itself in a draught," the centurion said. "Perhaps you saw a story you told yourself because a man with a rod likes quick stories." Felix lifted his chin a degree. "You call my doorkeeper a liar?" "I call him afraid," the centurion said. "Fear is not truth. It is a craftsman. It makes masks that look like truth." The senator's patience wore thin. "What do you want?" "I want to walk to Tanner's Alley," the centurion said. "With your steward?" "With this boy?" He pointed at Tiro. "Why the boy?" the senator asked. "He saw the cross from the ground at its foot," the centurion said. "Men who kneel near wood learn to see what tall men miss." Felix's jaw moved. "The boy has work. The boy has breath. Because I held a hammer," the centurion said, not loud, not soft. "He will walk." They walked at dusk, when the city smells grow stronger. The leather shops let out a sour stink that coated the tongue. Dogs gnawed scraps in the gut. Boys with quick eyes darted between men's legs and did not get stepped on. A woman with red hair sold pins. A man with one hand beat a drum with his elbow. The sky turned bronze for a little while, then slid toward iron. At the doorway of a back room, a boy with a scar on his lip flicked a glance at Felix and then looked down. Fear walked before Felix like a smell. The centurion stepped inside. Men around a table looked up slowly. A toothless one grinned. A thick one folded his arms over his belly. Demas, the lender, sat in the corner, not playing, just counting with his eyes. He smiled without his eyes. He said, "Officer?" as if the word were sour on his tongue and he liked sour things. "We are looking for a scrap of a thing," the centurion said. "A small wooden key, burned after use. A bit of metal with a fresh graven tooth. A box that was empty yesterday and full today." Demas's smile did not move. "We are full of scraps here," he said. "We burn many things." Tiro looked down. On the packed dirt floor near the brazier, ash formed a little heap. In the ash, a darker piece lay. It was not wood. It was something that had been wood and then had met fire and then refused to be gone. He crouched, put 2 fingers into the cool edge of the ash and lifted the thing. It was a sliver of a key, charred, with one tooth not quite burned away. It had been cut in a rush. It had been used once, maybe twice. The room changed. Not by movement, by attention. Men's eyes turned. Demas's mouth went flat. Felix took half a step without taking a step. The centurion took the little sliver between finger and thumb and turned it. "Bees," he said again, very soft. He put the sliver in his pouch with the curl of wire. "I will ask the prefect to open your boxes," he said to Demas. Demas kept his voice smooth. "Ask prefects," he said. "They like to be asked. They come when called. They go when paid." The centurion's eyes did not blink. "Do you pay soldiers to leave crosses empty?" Demas laughed once, short. "I pay to keep my purse full," he said. Felix spoke, calm. "The centurion is wasting time on scraps. A thief stole. A thief died. Rome is clean." The centurion looked at Felix and said nothing. He looked at Tiro and said nothing. He turned and left. They walked back through streets that had learned to be dark without lanterns. Halfway home, a hand grabbed Tiro's arm from a shadow. Another hand grabbed his mouth. He twisted. Pain from his back burst like sparks. A voice harsh and low said into his ear, "Stop your ears!" The hands shoved him into a narrow passage between two walls where old trash slept. Felix stepped into the narrow mouth of the passage. He did not come inside. He stood where his clean sandals would not touch filth. Moonlight touched the edge of his face and made it look like a coin. "Listen," he said, soft. "We both like breath. Keep yours." Tiro did not speak. The hand left his mouth. Felix's voice stayed calm. "You have walked close to men with swords today," he said. "You have stood close to wood. Your skin knows new letters. Learn new ones. This is how a house lives. The master's honor sits on a high shelf. If a ring falls, it returns. If a slave steals, he dies. If a steward moves fast, it is because slow men break cups. If a soldier plays at judge, he will get tired. If a boy opens his mouth at the wrong time, he will not open it again. Do you hear?" Tiro swallowed. He could feel the shape of the cross in his spine again. "I hear," he said. Felix nodded once. "Good. Tomorrow at first light you will carry a wrapped bundle to the barracks. You will give it to the centurion. You will say, 'From the house, in thanks that you kept the law clean.' You will bow. You will not talk. Do this, and you will breathe another day. Do not do this, and you will learn how long a man can hang and still think. Do you hear?" "What is in the bundle?" Tiro asked before he could stop the words. Felix's smile in the moonlight did not reach his eyes. "Thank yous," he said. "Rome runs on them." He stepped back. The hands that had held Tiro vanished like rats when a door opens. The passage went cold. Tiro walked out into the street with his legs shaking. He felt a thought grow teeth. If he carried the bundle and the centurion took it, the law would bend. If the law bent, Felix would be right forever. If he refused, he would meet the wood again, and this time no voice would bark, "Stop!" He slept little, and he dreamed of a key half-burned, and of bees, and of a cross that turned into a table, and of a table that turned into a cross again. At first light, Felix stood waiting in the yard with a small wrapped parcel tied in cord. It was heavy for its size. "Go," he said. "Do not stop." Tiro took the bundle. He walked into the morning with the city's breath cool on his face. In the square by the barracks, soldiers drilled. The centurion stood near the gate with a clerk, reading names off a board. Tiro's mouth went dry. He felt the bundle in his hands like a living thing. He could turn left and hand the parcel over. He could turn right and throw it into the Tiber. He could run, he could kneel, he could speak. He walked straight. "From the house," he said, holding out the parcel, "in thanks that you kept the law clean." The centurion looked at the parcel. He looked at Tiro. His eyes went to the cord, to the knot, to the weight. He did not touch it. He said, "Walk with me." They stepped aside into the shade near the gate. The centurion took a knife from his belt and cut the cord. He opened the cloth. Inside were 12 silver pieces, bright as small moons, and under the coins was a second small bundle, thinner, wrapped in plain waxed linen. The centurion lifted the linen. Inside was a sliver of blue wax, like the face of a key pressed once and peeled away, and a tiny bronze blank not yet cut. He did not smile. He did not curse. He closed the linen. He set the silver aside on the stone ledge and covered it with the cloth. He held the small wax and the blank in his palm. "From the house," he repeated. His voice was like a rope drawn tight. "Tell your steward I will return his thank you when I finish counting his bees." He put the wax and the blank into the pouch with the other bits. He did not touch the silver again. He called to a soldier, "Take this money to the prefect's office. Say it came to me with a gift for the city's record. Write the house name, write the steward's." The soldier took the silver and ran. The centurion turned to Tiro. "You are learning to live between teeth," he said. "It is not a place for long life. Be careful." Tiro's chest felt tight and light at the same time. He had not fallen. He had not stood. He had walked. Now he had to breathe. "Do I go back?" he asked. The centurion looked past him at the flow of the street, vendors, clients, boys with barley cakes, a man with a lute, a woman with a dead chicken by the legs. He looked at the barracks door, at his clerk, at the board with names, at the sky. "You go back," he said, "because that is what a slave does when the sun is up. But listen, I will come at noon. I will ask for the steward's key ring. If he refuses, I will take it. If he runs, I will chase. If he stands, I will open his mouth with questions until he has to choose between spit and truth." Tiro nodded. He started to turn. The centurion caught his sleeve. "One more thing," he said. "You saw Parmenon's body last night?" Tiro swallowed. "Yes. Where?" "Hanging." "Still?" "Yes." The centurion's jaw tightened. "Rome likes to leave slaves for the birds," he said, "but sometimes, if a master asks, a body can be cut down before dogs find it. Did your master ask?" "No." "Did your lady?" "No." The centurion sighed out through his nose. "Then the wind will carry what is left. Go." Tiro walked away. Each step felt like a coin tossed into a deep well, no sound coming back. He passed under an arch where a woman sold figs. He passed a shrine with a little fire that never went out. He passed a beggar with eyes like holes. He passed a sign painted in red, Cave Canem, beware of the dog. He reached the house gate. He stepped into the cool hall. Felix stood there, hands clasped, as if he had been carved from wood and placed by the door at dawn. "Well?" Felix asked. "I gave it," Tyrrell said. "He thanked you." Felix's eyes searched his face for more. Tiro gave him nothing to find. Felix's mouth did a small thing, half smile, half something else. "Good," Felix said. "Now take this list to the market and bring back what is written. Do not add, do not forget. Do not speak to anyone who asks you what you carry." He placed a wax tablet in Tyro's hand. Names of fish, names of herbs, a measure of oil, a cut of pork. Ordinary things. Tiro bowed and left again. His legs learnt now to walk the city like a thread through cloth. At the market he kept his eyes low and his ears open. He heard Demas arguing with a man about interest. He heard a fruit seller sing the price of grapes. He heard two washerwomen whisper, "They say the soldiers took money from a house and wrote the steward's name." "Which house?" "Hush." He heard a child say, "Why do men hang like birds?" And a mother say, "So you will not steal." He bought what was written. He turned to go. A hand touched his arm. He turned. It was the street woman who had shouted at the cross the day before. She held her sleeve with one hand again and something small in the other. "You ran fast yesterday," she said. "You look like a man who does not want to run today." "I do not," Tiro said. She opened her hand. In her palm lay a small clay token with a mark pressed into it, a bee with wings wide. "The man who dropped the ring also dropped this," she said. "I kept it because people like me keep small things that might buy bread later. I thought the mark was pretty. Today a boy told me a steward in a fine house keeps bees in boxes on his roof. He showed me a jar of honey with the same mark." Tiro stared at the token. The world seemed to tilt without moving. "Why do you give it to me?" he asked. She shrugged. "Because I like my sleep," she said. "A thing like that in my stall makes sleep small." Tyro took the token. He closed his fingers around it and felt the little wings press into his skin. At noon, before the sun reached the roof's edge, boots sounded again in the hall. The centurion entered with 2 men and a clerk. "By order of the prefect," he said in a voice that filled rooms, "I ask for the keys of the house steward." Felix stood in the center of the floor with his wax tablet. He looked at the centurion, then at the senator, then at Livia. The senator did not speak. Livia did not blink. Felix reached to his belt, and then the outer gate cried out. A hard knock, then a fist on wood, then a cry, "Open in the name of the prefect!" Another squad came in, fast. The leader held a strip of leather with a seal pressed into it, fresh, blue. A bee with wings wide. He said, loud for all to hear, "Household of Senator Lucius, your steward is charged with conspiracy to pervert the law, with bribery of an officer, with false witness by torture, and with the theft of property under his care by means of a false key. He will come with us." Felix did not run. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who knows what hidden doors are built into his own house. He opened his mouth to speak, and somewhere on the roof above them, bees stirred. The words hung in the air like a net, charged with conspiracy, bribery, false witness by torture, theft by false key. Felix smiled. It was not the smile of a man surprised. It was a smile that said he had rehearsed this moment in the mirror of a bronze bowl and taught his face to be a mask. On the roof the bees woke. A soft hum rose, thin at first, then thicker, like a pot beginning to boil. The first squad moved to take Felix's arms. He raised a palm. "Let me give you the keys," he said, voice mild. "A good house keeps its tools in order." He reached toward his belt. "Slow," the centurion said. Felix nodded. "Slow, slow, slow." His hand slid to the ring of keys at his waist. But his fingers did not close on metal. They dipped instead under the leather band, where the belt met the fold of his tunic. A small motion, the kind that lives under other men's eyes and goes unseen until it is late. The centurion saw. "Hands up!" he said, sharp as a dog's bark. Felix's hands rose. Something small fell from the fold of his tunic and tapped the floor. A bean-sized lump of wax wrapped in thin linen. The nearest soldier bent to pick it up. Felix moved. He did not strike. He did not shout. He stepped past the soldier, fast as a fish when a heron's beak dips. He slipped through the side door that led to the stairs. He knew the house like a map drawn in his bones. He had walked it in the dark. He had counted the steps in 10 kinds of light. He knew which stair missed a nail and which door stuck in heat. "Up!" the centurion shouted. Boots thundered after him. Tyro ran too. His back burned, his breath scraped his throat. Fear pulled his legs the way a rope pulls water from a well. They burst onto the roof, into a white sun. The city lay around them in flat plains and low walls, tile, smoke, laundry lines, a distant blue slice of the Tiber like a thought of the sea. 3 short wooden hives stood in a row near the parapet, painted with the little bee mark that matched the token in Tyro's pocket. Felix stood beside the hives with a small clay pot in his hand. He tipped it and flicked something over the hives. Oil or smoke or both, the bee's hum rose to a rough edge. "Do not be foolish," the centurion said, coming up fast with 2 soldiers at his side. Felix smiled that same quiet smile. "I keep order," he said, "even here." He slapped the flat of his hand against the side of the nearest hive. The box shuddered. The bees poured out in a dark cloud that changed the air. They moved like a living cloth, thick and wild, and struck at the men with a sound like rain on a drum. A soldier flung an arm in front of his face and swore. The other lost his cap and batted at his cheeks. The centurion pulled his cloak over his head and squinted through the stings. He did not back up. Tiro stood very still. Bees do not like a man who thrashes. He had learned that in a country winter once, standing too close to a hive near a fig tree while a farmer's boy stole a taste of honey. He set his jaw and closed his lips so no sting would find a tongue. Felix moved along the low wall. He kept one arm up to shield his eyes. His feet knew the roofline. One step to the right, two to the left, and there, the gap to the next roof where a neighbor's house touched, just close enough for a careful man to cross. He put one foot on the wall. "Tiro," the centurion said from under his cloak. "Left," Tiro understood. He cut left, not toward Felix's waist, but toward his ankle. He hit it hard with his shoulder. Felix stumbled. His body smacked the parapet and slid, one leg hanging into the gap. The clay pot spun away and broke. The bee's cloud kept coming, angry at everything. Felix clawed for the edge. Tiro grabbed the belt at his waist and pulled. For a heartbeat, the two men hung in a seesaw. One inside, one outside. Life balancing on a strip of leather and a man's grip. Then two soldiers grabbed Tiro's tunic and hauled them both back onto the tiles. Felix lay on his back, breath coming fast. Stings bloomed on his neck like small fires. His eyes were bright, not with fear, but with calculation that never slept. The centurion stood over him, face swollen in places the bees had found, eyes narrow and steady. "Enough," he said. It was not a shout. It did not need to be. His knife flashed. He cut the ring of keys from Felix's belt. He took the man's wrists. He bound them. Felix did not fight the rope. He looked up at the sky, as if to measure the time he had lost and the time he might still grab. They went down from the roof in a line, centurion, soldiers, Felix, Tiro, and a few bees that hitched a last angry ride on tunics and hair. The house swallowed them, cool and dim after the sun. Livia stood in the hall, a veil over her hair now, her jaw set. The senator stood beside her, mouth a thin line. "Your steward fled," the centurion said to the senator. "Your steward loosed bees at Roman soldiers. Your steward now gives me his keys." He lifted the ring, iron, bronze, some small, some large, one with a bit of blue wax still half pressed into its teeth. "We will see which doors cry." He led the small procession to the storeroom off the corridor where the house kept tools and flats of unused oil lamps. Felix's head turned as they passed, a glance to the right, not long, not eager, but real. The centurion saw. He stopped at the next door on the right and slid a key into a lock. The lock opened with a sound like a throat clearing. They stepped into a narrow room that smelled of leather, old smoke, and something sweet, the tang of worked metal and warm wax. A small brazier sat cold on a low stand. On a shelf, a row of little clay molds, each the length of a finger. In a shallow bowl, curls of wire-like hairs made of bronze. On a scrap of board, outline sketches scratched with a stylus, the shape of keyholes, the inside teeth of locks, a list of measurements that meant everything to the right hands and nothing to the wrong eyes. On a peg hung a short strip of wood with letters cut into it backward, so that when it stamped wax, the letters would read forward. A bee with wings wide and, beside it, Domus L, House of Lucius. The centurion did not speak for a moment. He walked along the shelf as a farmer walks a line of vines he planted himself. He lifted a clay mold. He pressed it gently. It broke and showed the hollow inside shaped like a key. He held up the strip of wood with the bee and turned to Livia. "Your honey jars?" he asked. Livia lifted her chin a little. "We give them to clients on festival days." "The mark is yours?" "It is the house's," she said. "Who keeps the stamp?" "Felix," she said, "and I sign each jar with a thread of ribbon." The centurion nodded. He set the stamp down and picked up a wax tablet from the corner of the work table. On it were scratch marks and columns of numbers. The top line read, entries. The next, gifts. The next, debts. Under gifts sat names, Demas, 2 jars, small purse, doorkeeper, bread, messenger at barracks, silver, promised later. Under debts, Parmenon's brother, 3 months late. Kitchen boy, paid with oil. Ring man, 1, returned 1. Ring man, the centurion said, tapping the line. Felix smiled again, slight, like a sheet pulled over a sharp thing. A way to remember who touched what, he said. A good house keeps lists. A bad man writes in them, the centurion said. He turned to the senator. Your steward made a small shop inside your walls. He cut keys, he stamped seals, he counted gifts that walked in circles. He bought obedience with honey and fear with the rod. He named a boy thief, drove him to the post, and would have nailed him to the cross if the crowd had not grown a voice. The senator swallowed. Pride and shame wrestled on his tongue. He did not like being told that his house had become a market for small crimes. He did not like hearing it from a soldier who did not bow deep enough to suit him. He liked most of all to be a man whose house stood tall and clean and feared. Will Rome take him? He asked. Rome must, the centurion said, is a slave. The law can nail slaves. It can lash them, it can burn them, it can hang them for the birds. It can do any of these things if the city is to teach. But hear this too, your house will answer for what he did in your name. The law will look at your gate and ask why bees flew from it to sting an officer's face. Livia's eyes slid to Felix, and for the first time a line of anger cut across the cool water of her gaze. You used my jars, she said, quiet. You used my seal. Felix bowed a little. I kept the house in order, he said. I kept men in line. I kept fear where it belongs. You kept yourself in silver, the centurion said, holding up the tablet. Felix's eyelids lowered. Silver is the weight that keeps order from blowing away, he said. A slave makes people fear him, and they call it a sin. A citizen makes people fear him, and they call it a virtue. I learned from Rome. Silence laid a thin layer over the room. The centurion broke it. Bind him to the post, he said. 2 soldiers took Felix by the arms. He did not resist. He walked out with the same careful step he had used every morning of his life, heels soft, toes sure. He did not look at Tiro. He did not need to. Tiro could feel the man's attention like a hand at his back, even when the hand did not touch him. They led him to the back court, where the post stood dark with old stains. The rope went round his wrists. The whip lay coiled like a sleeping snake. The centurion did not lift it. He faced Felix. You will speak names, he said. Who took your money? Who carried your gifts? Who told you to move quicker than the law? If you speak, your end will be shorter. If you sing like stone, it will be long. Felix looked at the sky. I have one master, he said. He stands under this roof. All eyes slid to the senator, some because they wanted to see power, some because they did not want to miss whatever happened next. The senator's tongue pressed against his teeth. He tasted iron from a sting on his lip. He had known men like Felix before. A slave that becomes a part of the house like a stair or a door, until no one sees him and he moves everyone else. He had liked that Felix kept his accounts neat. He had liked that guests did not wait for wine. He had liked that no thefts had been known, because hidden thefts do not bruise pride. He did not like now that the city watched his gate as if it were a stage. Speak, he said to Felix. If you served me, serve me now. Tell the names. Felix's eyes slid to Demas in the outer room, who had arrived like a smell before rain, and now stood with hands folded and face empty. They slid to the doorkeeper. They slid to the soldier's clerk, who was already scratching lines on a wax board to carry to the prefect. They slid, at last, to Livia, who had not sat. Felix gave a small laugh with no joy. Names are easy, he said. They fly like bees. They sting the wrong face if the wind turns. He turned his head and looked straight at Tiro. "Boy," he said, "what did I tell you last night?" Tiro's stomach tightened. He remembered the passage, the cool wall, the hands, the voice that had said, "Keep your breath." He did not answer. The centurion's gaze flicked between them. He lifted his hand. A soldier unwound the whip and let the tails fall. The little metal tongues winked in the light. Felix spoke before the whip did. "Wait," he said. "I will spare your back a little work. The names you want sit where you already looked." He nodded toward the small workroom. "In the shelf, under the bottom board. Lift it," the centurion signed to a man, who ran. He returned with a thin bundle bound in cord. The centurion opened it. Inside lay strips of wax with impressions pressed into them, keys' teeth frozen in blue. There were names written in a tight hand along the edge of each strip. Lady's box, outer gate, cellar stores, room of Damus, back door. "Damus," the centurion said, looking at the lender. Damus's smile returned, wide and cool. "Men keep spare keys for many reasons," he said. "I keep mine because I forget my own door." "Your door is in another man's house," the centurion said. Damus shrugged. "The city is one house," he said. "We all borrow each other's rooms." The centurion turned his attention back to Felix. "Who else?" Felix lifted a shoulder against the rope. The doorkeeper took bread to keep his eyes soft. The messenger at the barracks ran notes that did not exist. The little boy in the market passed tokens when I asked him to sing a price. The lender bit. The lady looked away when her table shone, and her guests praised her order. The master liked that praise. The law stood on the step outside and waited until yesterday to walk in. "You smear the whole house," the centurion said. Felix's mouth tugged. "The house is Rome. I learned from it." The centurion's head inclined a fraction, as if to say he had heard this before, from men in togas and men in rags. "Then Rome will teach you now." He stepped back. He did not lift the whip. Not yet. He nodded to a soldier who brought the titulus tablet and a stylus. "What shall I write?" the soldier asked. The centurion spoke the words as if laying stones. "Felix coniratio, falsum per tortum." "Plaster falsa." Crux. Felix breathed out through his nose. "The cross," he said softly, "not the rod only, not the mines, the cross." "You are a slave," the centurion said. "The law takes slaves to wood." Felix turned his face toward Livia. "Lady," he said, "ask for mercy. Ask for the rod only. Ask for the mines. Ask for my back, not my breath." Livia's jaw set. He had used her seal. He had turned her roof into a shop. He had almost nailed an innocent boy beneath the sun. She had hardened her eyes for years to keep a great house from melting in other people's heat. Now Felix nodded once, as if he had expected nothing less from a lesson he himself had given. The centurion turned to Tero. "You will walk," he said, "with the others when we carry the beam. You will stand where you stood yesterday. You will see what Rome does when a man makes fear into a tool and calls it order." Tero's throat felt small. Words would not fit. He nodded. They took Felix through the gate. The afternoon lay on the road like a metal plate. Hot, hard. People came again, as they always do. The curious, the cruel, the tired, the ones who say they hate such things and somehow find their feet walking toward them anyway. The patibulum was laid across Felix's shoulders. He did not flinch when the wood touched skin. He had taught flinching to others. He would not show it himself. The rope tied his wrists to the beam. The titulus went ahead. "Felix coniratio, falsum per torturum, clavis falsa." Crux. The words marched. Tiro walked with the line of house slaves. He could feel eyes on his healed and broken back. He felt the bee token in his palm. its wings pressing his skin through the cloth of his sleeve. He felt the weight of the city on his chest, the weight that says, "This is how we do things, this is how we keep order, this is the price of our peace." At the place of the cross, the soldiers worked as they always worked, steady, practiced, not eager, not slow. They stretched Felix on the beam. A soldier found the gap in the wrist bones with his thumb. The hammer rose. Felix turned his head and looked at Tiro. His eyes were bright. The look held no plea. It held a message that had no words and still spoke. "This is the world. Learn it, or it will learn you." The hammer fell. The iron bit. The crowd made that same sound, as if a cup had cracked in a quiet room. They lifted the beam. They set it on the upright. Felix's body pulled against the nails. He found the strange work of breathing that every crucified man learns. He pushed up. He sagged. He pushed again. He made small sounds that were not words. The centurion stood at his post, counting time by a clock only soldiers hear. The sun burned. Flies gathered. A boy asked for bread and was hushed. The world kept moving while a man's life was nailed to a piece of wood. After a while, the centurion lifted his hand. A soldier brought the sponge with Posca. He held it up. Felix turned his face. He drank. He coughed. He breathed. The centurion looked up and asked the same question he had asked the day before, because the law likes its lines and uses them again and again until they fit every mouth. "Did someone place your hand? Did someone sit behind your shoulder and whisper? Speak, and your end may be shorter." Felix lifted himself for air. His eyes found Damas at the edge of the crowd. The lender's green stone dull now in the heat. His eyes found the senator. His eyes found Livia. They came at last to Tiro. He smiled, soft, almost kind, as if they were in the kitchen and he was telling Tiro to set the bread just so. "Names," he said, voice thin. "You want names." He took a breath that cut. "The man with a purse," he said, and his eyes flicked to Damas. The door with the soft eyes. His gaze brushed the doorkeeper. The woman who sweetened the jars. He looked for one heartbeat only at Livia. The master who liked his rooms to look clean. His eyes passed the senator. The city that teaches us all to nail or be nailed. His eyes went to the centurion and did not look away. The centurion's face did not move. He had heard worse and better. He had heard truth dressed as lies and lies dressed as truth. He answered like the law answers, simple and flat. "You chose your hand. Rome did not choose it for you." Felix's mouth twisted. "Rome chooses the road," he said. "We just walk it." His body shook. He pushed up. He sagged. The centurion gave the small sign. A soldier reached for the heavy bar. The crowd shifted. That same wave that rolls forward when it knows the end is near, and hate and pity and hunger for closure all sit in one stomach together. Tyrrell felt his fingers close hard on the B token in his palm until the wings bit his skin. He felt a thought rise in him that he did not expect, a thought not about Felix or Demas or Livia or the centurion. It was about Parmenon. It was about the cross where an old, careful man had died so others could learn a lesson that would be taught again today with new wood. It was about a body left for birds because no one had spoken the right words. Tiro stepped toward the centurion before he could stop his feet. "Sir," he said, voice rough, "the man from yesterday, Parmenon." The soldier with the bar paused. The centurion looked at Tiro, at his closed fist, at the mark of wings in his skin. The crowd waited, hungry for one kind of end, and now forced to taste another kind of story. Tiro swallowed. "Can we cut him down?" he asked. "Can we lay him in earth? He was guilty. He paid, but he was decent before the fear. Let the lesson end." The centurion's eyes held Tiro's for a long breath. He looked at the senator. He looked at Livia. Livia's face changed in a small way, the way a tight thread loosens when a knot thinks about coming undone. She nodded once. "Do it," she said. "Carry the cost from my stores." The centurion turned to a soldier. "Go," he said. "Take 2 men. Bring the body. We will give it back to the ground." The crowd murmured. Some frowned. Some looked relieved. Some looked lost, as if the story had taken a path they did not know how to follow. Felix laughed once on the cross. It was a small sound. It hurt him to make it. "Mercy for the old," he said, "and wood for the new. That is Rome's fairness." The centurion's hand lifted again. The soldier with the bar stepped forward. And just then a shout came from the road below, urgent, thin, cutting through heat like a knife through skin. "Hold! Message from the prefect!" A rider pushed through the fringe of the crowd, dust on his cloak, a strip of leather in his raised hand. A blue seal flashed in the sun. The centurion lowered his arm without turning his head. He stared at the seal as if it could bite. Livia took half a step. The senator's jaw clenched. Demas's eyes narrowed. Tyrrell felt the token in his palm and thought of wings and keys and nails, and the little lines that decide whether a day becomes death or breath. The rider swung down, breath burning, and held out the prefect's order. The centurion broke the seal. He read. His face did not show what the words said. He lifted his eyes to Felix, to the crowd, to Tiro, and in that held breath between command and action, between Rome's habit and Rome's choice, the whole city seemed to tilt on a point as small as a bee's wing. The centurion broke the seal and read in the hot light. The rider wiped dust from his lips and waited. The crowd leaned forward the way wheat leans when a wind moves across a field. The centurion looked up. His voice was steady. "By the prefect's order," he said, "stay the execution. Deliver the steward Felix alive to the cohort for questioning. Seize the lender Demas for examination of accounts. Secure the house keys and seals. Record the names of all who took gifts." A thin noise went through the crowd, the sound people make when the story they were watching steps off the road they thought it would take. Some muttered, angry that the end they had paid for with their feet would not arrive on time. Some looked relieved in a small, guilty way. Some shrugged. Rome changes its face the way light changes when a cloud crosses the sun. The soldier with the heavy bar froze, then lowered it. The centurion nodded once to the men at the foot of the cross. "Down," he said. Careful. They brought a ladder. They worked with quick hands. They knew where to press and how to turn so that living flesh tore less. The nails came out slick and dark. The beam gave back what it had stolen, not all at once, not cleanly, but it gave. Felix sagged into the arms of 2 soldiers. His breath came like little fires. His head hung. His eyes opened, and in them sat pain and a thought that had not left. Not even now. "Alive," the centurion said. "Keep him alive." 2 men slid a board under Felix and tied him to it with strips of cloth. This was not mercy. It was need. The prefect wanted a mouth that could answer questions. Rome loved answers even more than it loved blood. The centurion turned. "Demas," he said. The lender tried to leave with the tail of the crowd. He moved sideways with a man's careful slowness, as if the air had turned thick. 2 soldiers were faster. They took his arms. His green ring looked cheap in the honest sun. "Citizen!" Demas cried. "I am a citizen." "Yes," the centurion said, "which is why you will not taste wood." But the prefect enjoys reading numbers that do not add up. He will pour your purse on a table and ask where each coin learnt to walk. He looked up. "You," he said to the clerk, "write the names of those who watched and sold and carried." The clerk scratched. "Rome writes in wax what it intends to remember in stone." The centurion turned to Tiro. "Go with the men to the road," he said. "Bring Parmenon's body. The lady will pay for linen and a jar of myrrh. The man will go to earth with a stone that says his name. That much we can give back to a life." Tiro bowed. His throat ached around a knot that would not move. He ran. 2 soldiers went with him. The day seemed to grow hotter as they reached the place of yesterday. The cross still threw its thin shadow. Parmenon hung in it, smaller now somehow, like a man growing thin in sleep. Flies lifted and settled. A dog watched and waited and then went away. They cut the ropes that held the body to the wood. They eased him down, his head turned to the side, and a lock of grey hair stuck to his cheek. Tiro spread a strip of cloth over the face. He had never done this before, but his hands knew what to do. There are some tasks a body remembers without being taught. They carried him back slowly, through the gate, past the fountain where children splashed, under the arch where a fig seller called out his price in a voice too bright for a day like this. People stepped aside. Some crossed themselves in the old way, some looked and looked away. In the back court, Livia stood by a table where a jar and cloth had been set. She did not flinch at the smell of death. She lifted a hand, and a maid came with water. The centurion nodded thanks and stood aside. This was not a soldier's work, this was a house's work. They washed Parmenon the way the old women of his village would have washed him once. In small circles with murmurs that were not prayers, but sounded like them. Tiro wiped the hands that had polished rings and mended clasps. He thought of those hands holding one wrong thing at the wrong hour, and of everything that had followed from that single turn of a key. When the washing was done, they wrapped the body in linen that smelled of sun and folded edges smooth. Livia took a small coin and pressed it into the mouth, the way her mother had taught her in a different house long ago. The way people do when they want to pay a ferryman in stories they half believe and half pretend not to. So he does not travel empty, she said, not to anyone, not to no one. The senator came, and for a moment he looked as if he were trying to count something that numbers cannot catch. He nodded to the centurion. "May he be buried outside the walls," he said. "The cost is mine." The centurion bowed. "It is noted." They carried Parmenon out in a slow line. Some house slaves followed with heads low. A few neighbors joined the walk, not because they knew the man, but because they knew what it is to carry weight together. At a place where graves climbed a small hill, they laid him down. A cutter chipped his name into soft stone. Parmenon, slave of Lucius, who worked with careful hands. It was not much. It was more than a field of crows. When they returned, the house had become a different place. Soldiers stood at doors. The little workroom's shelves sat empty, the molds wrapped and sealed. The doorkeeper sat on a stool with his hands in his lap and looked old in a way he had not looked yesterday. The lender Demas was gone, taken to the prefect. Felix was gone, carried to the barracks. The board, the cloth, the breath, the questions waiting. That night the house slept like a man who keeps waking. Tiro lay on his mat and stared at the ceiling. The day rewound itself again and again. The blue wax, the bee's wings press in his palm, the rings flash, the look in Parmenon's eyes when his breath climbed toward air and then fell toward earth. The moment the bar did not fall on Felix because a small seal told it not to. He remembered the centurion's face in the square and the way a law can hold a crowd like a rope holds an animal that is learning to be led. He slept near dawn. He woke hungry and sore and alive. Days followed. Rome does not stop for one man's pain. It ties it into the rope of all men's work. The prefect's men came and went. They took copies of account tablets. They spoke with clients and with kitchen boys. They asked questions that turned simple words into slow, careful ones. Who carried the jar? Who stamped the bee? Who touched the key? Who said nothing and why? Demas's shop shut. Its door kept its secrets for a little while. Then carts carried out boxes of wax tablets and jarred coins and pieces of paper with numbers where words should have been. A scribe at the prefect's office turned the pile into neat lists. His hand did not tire, his mouth did not speak. He would live longer than any nail. The centurion visited the house, but not every day. He was busy in a city that always needs a door held shut or kicked open. When he came, he spoke briefly and looked much. He checked seals. He checked locks. He looked at Tiro's back once, and then looked away with a small nod, as if to say it healed as clean as it could. In the second week, news came the way news comes, by mouth, by market, by the boy who runs faster than his fear. The steward talked, someone said by the fish stall. He gave names of men who opened doors they were not allowed to open. He said the lender paid him. He said he did it for order. He said he did it because order breaks without fear. "What will they do?" a woman asked, setting her basket down. "He is a slave," a man answered, cutting a fish in one long, clean line. "They will do what Rome does to slaves who bite the hand that holds them. But not today. Today they ask more questions. Tomorrow they may finish the line." That afternoon, Livia called Tiro to the tablinum. The light fell in a square on the floor. The little pool made the sound of small water thinking. Livia held a wax tablet. The senator sat with arms crossed, a weight in his eyes. "Listen," Livia said. She read in her clear, cool voice. "When my will is written, if the gods permit me to die in order and not chaos, Tiro will be freed, with a suitable sum for clothes and the rights due to a freedman of the house of Lucius." Her voice did not change. It was like water pouring from a jar. "Until then, he will be protected from the rod, except by order of the master or the lady. He will serve as a runner and assistant in the rooms where guests sit. He will not be sent to the post without the master's hand on the order." She stopped. The room felt larger for a moment. Tiro did not speak. He bowed low. He did not trust his mouth. Livia's eyes flicked to the bruised lines that crossed his forearms where the ropes had rubbed. "You lived," she said. "Make that cost worth something." The senator's jaw moved. "Do not mistake this for softness," he said. "A house stands because rules stand. You will remember that your place is still below the table." "Yes, master," Tiro said. Livia lifted the tablet. "Go," she said. "Work." He went. His steps felt strange, as if the floor had changed under his feet. In a way, it had. A few words on a tablet can change the length of a man's chain. Late that week, the centurion stood again in the atrium. "It is done," he said. Livia did not ask who or what. The air said enough. The house quieted on its own. "Felix?" the senator asked. The centurion nodded. "This morning, by the Esquiline gate," he said. The titulus named his crimes. The prefect wanted the city to read them. He died after the sun passed the noon mark. He gave names that we have written. He gave reasons that we will not. The lender Demas pays a heavy fine and loses his right to lend for 5 years. He will keep his head and his ring. He is a citizen. The doorkeeper is whipped and dismissed. The messenger from the barracks is sent to a cohort on the far road, where men forget their own names. The boy from the market returns to his mother, with a warning that will keep his ears red for a month. He did not smile. He did not frown. He delivered a list to a house that had learned to take notes. "And Parmenon?" Livia asked softly, surprising herself. The centurion's voice gentled by a thread. "He lies under a stone with his name," he said. The earth took him back. He turned to Tiro. "And you—" He stopped. He searched for words that would still fit in a mouth trained to be simple. "You stepped into a space most men never step into, between wood and law, between what is easy and what is right enough to try for in a city like this." Tiro stood, hands folded, eyes low. "I carried a jar," he said, because that is how his mind kept him safe, by making large things small enough to hold. The centurion's mouth tugged, almost a smile. "Keep carrying," he said. "Carry truth when you can. Carry silence when you must. Learn the difference or the world will teach it to you the hard way." He touched the pouch at his belt. The little place where the curl of wire and the sliver of key and the blue wax lived, like small true stones. "And remember the bees," he said. "Rome keeps many hives. Some men shout and swing, others hum and build and sting. Learn which is which." He left. His boots found the rhythm of men who know the map of a city because they have walked it until it became their body. Time moved. Autumn came as a slow gold. Bread cost a little more. Figs went soft, then left. The river ran lower. The games were announced in chalk on a wall near the baths. The senator's clients lined his hall with their requests and their flatteries. Livia's ring sat in its box, and sometimes she took it out and stared at the blue for a long time, as if it held a small sky she could move with her fingers. She wore it less. She watched more. The roof lost 2 hives. The third stayed. Not every part of a life built on wrong is wrong by nature. Bees work because they are bees. Sweetness is not guilty for the mouth that steals it. Tiro ran errands and learned faces. He learned which client had a tongue that loved lies and which one loved the taste of his own words. He learned how to listen without speaking and how to speak without anger when someone's anger needed to pass through him to reach the floor and vanish. He learned to keep wax clean and keys honest. He learned the names of locks, the way some boys learn the names of horses. In the kitchen, laughter returned in small pieces. The dice clicked again. Men told jokes that would have gotten them whipped if Felix had been in the doorway. The new steward was slower and less certain. He counted cups twice and missed other things. The house learnt to live with a man who made fewer enemies and more mistakes. Sometimes that is a good trade. One evening, as the sun slid down and turned the bricks red, Tiro climbed the roof with a jar. He stood by the last hive and watched the bees come home, their legs thick with dust that would turn into something sweet. He did not touch them. He did not fear them. He listened to the hum until his breath matched it. He thought of Parmenon's careful hands. He thought of the woman at the market who had shouted, "Stop!" at a hammer because she did not want to sleep with a blue stone in her stall. He thought of the centurion's face when he held the small wax like a truth, too small to show a crowd. He thought of Demas's flat eyes. He thought of Livia's cool voice reading his name into a future he could not yet see. He thought of Felix on the cross and of the smile that had held a lesson without kindness. He thought of Rome. Rome lined its roads with stones and with crosses. It wrote its laws in bronze and its orders on leather. It carved its heroes in marble and buried its slaves in dirt. It wanted to be strong, and strong it was. It wanted to be ordered, and ordered it stayed most days. But it did not always ask whether the weight that kept its order from blowing away was justice or fear. It did not always care. Yet even in that city a small thing could turn a day. A woman's shout, a soldier's caution, a token with a bee, a boy who asked to cut a body down. The little things did not remake Rome. They did not pull down its walls or melt its law, but they pushed, here and there, like fingers against a locked door. Sometimes the door did not move. Sometimes it did, a hair, and a bit of light came through. Tiro poured a thin line of water into a shallow dish for the hive, the way Felix had taught a boy long ago, on a winter day when no one was watching. He set the jar down and leaned on the low wall. The city lay out flat and endless, the roofs, the lanes, the smoke, the bits of laughter and grief that make a world. He spoke, not loud, not soft, to no one and to everyone who had ever stood between a truth and a rule. A life is not a lesson, he said. A man is not a tablet. A whip writes fast, but it does not always write right. He opened his hand. The little clay token with the bee lay warm from his skin. He set it on the parapet. He did not throw it away. He did not keep it hidden. He let it sit where wind and time could find it and turn it into what they wished. Below, in the atrium, the senator's voice rose and fell as he spoke to a client about a case that would fill a basilica with talk. Livia's steps moved past the pool. A maid laughed once, quick and young. Somewhere in the lane, a boy kicked a ball and shouted a name that would matter to him for a week and then be gone. Tyro went back down the stairs. He carried a tray into the room where light fell like a square on the floor. He stood in the doorway and waited for the senator's nod. He set the cups in their places. He poured wine without spilling. He spoke when spoken to. He kept his eyes careful and his hands steady and his heart awake. He was still a slave. He was also a man who had stood where nails meet wood and said a small word that changed one thing. In Rome, that is not everything, but it is not nothing. And that is what really happened to a Roman slave during crucifixion. A body was turned into a warning, a crowd learned a lesson, a city told itself it was clean. But inside that vast machine, people still made choices, cruel ones, brave ones, quiet ones. A steward turned fear into a tool and climbed to his own cross. A lender hid behind a ring and found a rope around his purse. A woman with greens in a basket stopped a hammer with a shout. A soldier counted bees and made the law stand a little straighter for an hour. An old man died under a sign with 4 hard words. And a young slave with a raw back found that even in a world built to break him, a voice like his could still lean against the day and move it a finger's width. Rome would keep its roads and its crosses for a long time. The wind would keep blowing dust across both. But as long as some small part of a man kept his eyes open and his hands steady and refused to let the whip have the last word, there would be, here and there, a breath that belonged to him and not to the empire. Tiro carried the tray out. The house settled for the night. The bees on the roof hummed in their dark boxes. The city breathed. And somewhere far from the walls, a little stone stood where a careful man's name would not be eaten by birds.